Today we're going to talk to you about how we see a lot of the things that we've been discussing in the class playing out in the university itself, which is what Buck and I wrote our book about. And so all of these things really come together today. And Buck's going to kind of do the slides, and I'm going to chime in with various things as we go through. And what we really want you all to start thinking about, especially those of you who are in your first year or those of you who are going to stay in higher education, is how we take everything that we've learned and combine it to create an entrepreneurial university. Because as we say in the book, and I'm even more convinced of this now than I was 5 years ago when we wrote it, universities have to prove their value by creating societal impact, but also leverage our opportunity to do things for the world. And you're doing that by being here today, and I'll let Buck take it away, and then we'll see where all this goes.
So, I wanted to start by reminding us all where we've come, where we are, and where we're headed in the last few classes. We're almost done. There are like 3 classes left. So anybody hasn't figured out that, like, certainly by the time you get back from Thanksgiving, you need to be studying for finals, and maybe even before. It's it. We're about done. So this is the big class map, and astonishingly, we've covered all those things, right? Context, economics, remember that, John explaining to you economics a little bit? And then history, Lloyd Kramer, and philosophy, Jeffrey Sayre McCord, and the moral hazard of being an entrepreneur is that you might be a liar, remember that? And then we talked about social entrepreneurship and scientific and artistic entrepreneurship. And then we covered all those things: accounting, finance, design. Well, I'm sorry I missed that, but I heard it was really good. And the master talking to you about strategy. And a number of you stopped me afterwards and said, that was really something. And if you didn't figure that out, that was really something. And we have a recording of it, thank goodness. And Michael Porter, hearing strategy from Michael Porter is really a big deal. And I felt like he really came through. So what's left? As Holden said, what we want to do today and in the next 2 sessions after today is basically arm you guys, because we're kind of depending on you. And when we say arm, we want to kind of go through with you the opportunity and the potential that a place like this has, research universities have. And we want to give you some context in terms of how they work, because many of you are freshmen and sophomores and juniors, and you're going to be here for a while, and we're kind of counting on you now to pick up the baton and help us make things different around here and better. And we want to try to give you some of the context and the tools to do that. So today, Holden and I are going to talk about the book, as Holden said. And next Tuesday, Judith Cohn and a variety of other people are going to talk about kind of what happened after the book in terms of what's going on this campus right now and how you might be able to help. And then next Thursday, Philip Clay, who was 2 years ahead of me at UNC, and I was lucky enough to be in a couple of classes with him, and I would sit right next to him and look at his notes and make sure that I got everything, because he was a really smart guy, and he became chancellor at MIT. He was also one of the first black students in the history of UNC. So he'll be here a week from Thanksgiving. Amazing guy. But by the time we finish that, you guys will be well armed and to go off on your way. And then the last class on Tuesday is the bake-off with the top top projects up on the screen, and you guys having a chance to vote on them, and we'll see who wins. And we're also going to give you some lessons learned, some real takeaways to take home with you. Meanwhile, we're almost done with the final, except for the music questions. Nothing about drummers this time, though. But I don't know, you may be having, I saw everyone taking notes about Lila, right?
Layla.
Layla, sorry. Are you guys like pretty sure Layla's going to be on the final? I mean, I could see people just going crazy. Like, this sounds like an exam question. Okay. All right, so let's jump in. So that's the cover of the book, and just contextually, we started writing this. I'll give you a little sort of inside baseball here. We started writing this thing. Holden was a chemistry professor, and I had come here a couple of years before, and we taught some together, and someone at UNC Press said, "You want to write a book?" And neither one of us had ever written a book, or we probably would have said no, because we thought it wouldn't be that hard. It turned out to be a little harder than we thought. And we said, yes, we'll write a book. And then Holden became the dean of the college, and we said, do we want to keep going? And we decided, yeah. Then a year later, he became chancellor, and usually chancellors write books after they're done, because, right, exactly. Because if you write it before, when you start, then people are like, well, what have you done? And they hold you accountable. But we decided to keep going, and we did write it, and we're okay with people holding us accountable. And now we have, part of the reason we're doing this today is that we've got to write a new introduction and one more chapter for a paperback version, because we sold a lot of copies, like 9,000 copies, which we, you know, it's not as much as Harry Potter, but. So we're having to think what we want to say next, and usually the best way to do that is to like teach a class, and makes you start thinking about it again, rereading book, and hopefully we'll get some good ideas from you guys that we can shamelessly steal and put in the front of the book or in the new chapter. Okay, so this concept of the black swan, we started writing the book, and then something happened that nobody expected. So does anybody know about this concept of the black swan? Well, what a black swan is? So there's a very cool guy named, is it Nassim? Is that how you put it? Nassim Taleb. And he wrote a book called The Black Swan. Okay, so a black swan has three basic characteristics. One, it's an outlier. By any rational definition, it could never happen. Okay, so all swans are white, right? And everybody sort of thought forever that there were only white swans, and then someone discovered a black swan. But until then, everyone said, oh no, that's not possible, there are only white swans. Then the second characteristic of a black swan is it has extreme impact, way beyond anything you could imagine. And third, once it happens, there are all these great reasons and explanations why it makes total sense for it to have happened to begin with. So in the black swan's case, once one black swan was discovered, and people are going, oh my God, this upsets all of our understandings of genetics and everything else, then lots of other black swans got discovered, and then there was a rational explanation for why there were in fact black swans. In our case, the black swan was the financial meltdown. So we're halfway through the book, and the world just explodes, collapses in ways that no one could imagine. And so why is the financial meltdown a black swan? Think about the three characteristics. Was it predictable? Prior to it's actually happening, were people saying this is definitely going to happen? No. Come on, guys, let's go.
No.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Holden. We know you know the answer. Okay, so it was totally unpredictable. It was an outlier. It had extreme impact, right? I mean, it was like, yeah, huge impact. Billions of dollars, billions and billions, probably trillions of dollars of wealth lost in like 2 weeks. And once it happened, the pundits, right, all could explain why it was totally logical that this had happened, but only after the fact. So we were faced with this huge black swan, and we were like, maybe this book that we started off writing because we thought it would be interesting to write about entrepreneurship in the university and teaching and stuff had an impact way beyond that, because the world was demanding of universities all kinds of things that wasn't demanding before. And people were going on TV, like Eric Schmidt, who started Google, and Mike Porter, and they were all saying, we've got to innovate, and universities have got to take the lead. And suddenly, what we were writing about was a hell of a lot more important than we thought it was going to be. So, can we do this? This gives you a little context of what was going on at that time.
Well, we hear it all the time. We need education reform. Our young people are just not prepared in the areas of math and science as kids from other developed nations. So, do high school and college kids in this country still have what it takes to strike out on their own and invent something, build something from scratch? Let's ask somebody who knows the answers to those questions. Joining us now is Chancellor of the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, member of the President's Commission on Advisory Council on Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and he's co-author of the book, Engines of Innovation. So let me start with those questions. First of all, welcome to the show.
Thanks for bringing me.
Even though I am the yellow jacket, the Georgia Tech yellow jacket, I still welcome you.
Appreciate it.
We talk about that all the time. Kids today, high school kids moving into college, they just don't have math and science, or they don't have the desire. Do you agree with that? And if so, what do we need to do to kind of change that thought process to give them that ability to go out there, strike it on their own, and invent things the way you used to do?
Well, I think they do have the desire, and I think that universities are really good at giving people expertise, but sometimes we don't do as good a job at exposing folks to all the opportunities that are out there in the world, and especially when it comes to entrepreneurship. So one of the things we've done at Carolina is start a 4-course minor in entrepreneurship that helps kids understand a little bit about what it would be like to own their own business, and maybe a few years later when they work at a startup or they have an opportunity to form a startup, they'll know a little bit about that. Because I think what's important is to combine what universities do well, which is to teach people things in depth, like chemistry and physics, like we're talking about, but also to teach them what it's like to take risks in the marketplace and what it's like to work with people and organize people around a business objective.
So you're kind of going about this as, look, the traditional math and science, and all the courses that students take, right, that's fine, but we need to change the way we do things and maybe add to it. Yet at the same time, I'm getting news that the North Carolina House Appropriations Subcommittee on Education slashed education funding in the state by over 17%. This coming out just yesterday. How do you do it? How do you improve upon education at the college level, public college level, and at the same time your money is getting cut big time?
Well, we have to succeed, because the large companies are not going to do a lot of hiring in absolute numbers anytime soon. I'm sure you all talk about that here on the show a lot. And so all the job growth is going to come from small companies. And what you need for an entrepreneurial company is brain power and energy. Well, those are two things that we have a lot of universities, and every state university is facing the kind of challenges we are with their budget. We work the political process, and we try to make our university more efficient, and we've saved a lot of money in terms of the way we administer universities. But the thing we can't give up on is giving kids the opportunity to take the experience and the expertise that they get in universities and use it for the future. And we've also got to get our faculty involved in that. So the more faculty we can get spinning out things and commercializing them, the more that not only increases the impact of the university, but also creates an environment where students who are part of that environment will then go on and try to do the same thing.
Now, you're a part of the President's Council on Entrepreneurship. Certainly the President's policies, if not pushed in one direction by last November's election, didn't seem very business friendly, and certainly not for the entrepreneur that is working with a small amount of capital, trying to build a startup from scratch. What have you been able to tell the president? How has the president worked with you and your council to be able to get a more business and friendly environment?
Well, we're real excited about a lot of the things that we've been able to achieve on the council. Steve Case is the, one of the co-chairs, and he's the chair of the celebration subcommittee. And we made some early recommendations about how the White House needs to use the bully pulpit to celebrate entrepreneurship. And from that grew the Startup America effort that Steve is helping to lead along with Scott Case. And the White House is using a lot of the things they have to promote entrepreneurship. So last few months, I think the president's been doing a great job of talking about entrepreneurship. State of the Union was definitely directed at that, and that was an exciting thing for a lot of us who are scientists and educators.
All right, Chancellor Thorp, now I know you're doing good work down there at the University of North Carolina, and I know this because our very own Robert Gray, just a few years ago, was a slovenly, unmotivated, ne'er-do-well freshman doing nothing but playing quarters and doing keg stands 5 nights a week, and you turned him from there into a respected alumnus, one of the most respected members of the business of the journalism community. So Robert, obviously, people are doing things right down there in North Carolina. Robert has a few questions he wants to ask.
Yeah, Chancellor Thorpe, thanks for joining us here. And you talk about, the skeptics out there say entrepreneurs are born, not taught yet. You would liken them to one of our most famous teachers with a building named after him, Dean Smith, and one of his pupils with God-given talent, Michael Jordan. You do this in your book, saying that you can expand and even teach these folks with the born talent. Are you seeing the fruits of that being born out of this entrepreneurship minor that you started a couple of years ago, and also the incubators that you see come out of the business school there at King and Flagler?
Yeah, we're seeing a great increase in the things that students are going out and doing. Part of that is the entrepreneurship minor that you talked about. And another part of it is just the environment. If Bain and McKinsey aren't hiring as many people, then there's a lot of creative young talent that's going to create their own opportunities. And we're trying to create an environment where they have the skills and the encouragement that they can use to do that. And I think we continue to be amazed at how recent college graduates come up with new ways to contribute to society, and it's a great thing to see. It's the greatest thing about running a university.
And one trend we're certainly seeing is sort of the new mega donors out there. Bill Gates jumps to mind, Richard Branson does, and you're likening now universities, research universities, liberal arts universities, maybe to having a product in the terms of the research and shopping that to customers, these guys. How does that work at a public university? Are you under greater scrutiny because taxpayers may not agree necessarily with the politics or the aims of some of the research that maybe the Gates Foundation is interested in versus a smaller private university?
Well, public universities in general, I think, are getting good at fundraising. We've been doing a pretty good job at Carolina, a better job among public universities, but all public universities are looking to private funds as another source of funding a lot of our programs, and we're not quite as far along on that as some of the private universities. But I do think that what you said is correct, that there are a lot of donors out there who want to give to something specific that they think can make a difference in the world, and where they think either their alma mater or a university that they're giving to has the opportunity to do that. And for us, that's an entrepreneurial act, and I've been involved in a number of entrepreneurial companies before I became chancellor, and so pitching a project like that to a donor is very much like pitching a business plan for a new startup. And so I think you're going to see college presidents get more and more facile with this as time goes on.
All right, Robert Gray, proud, the UNC alumnus.
Great. Okay.
Okay. All right, so I did do the Rubik's Cube after it cut away. As you can see, it's sitting right there. That's after I solved it. And so he tried to suck me in and get me to say something bad about the president, and I didn't do that. I know a lot of people make comments about my skills with the media, but I managed to avoid saying anything bad about the President of the United States on Fox News, which would have been a bad thing. But I think that this interview kind of encapsulates the challenge that we're facing, because there are a lot of people at the university, probably your humanities lecturers who came here would be in this group, who don't think that we should have to go out there and say that the university has these various uses. and that we're going to do these various things, and certainly that we should be talking about it on Fox News. But, you know, I believe we've sort of passed the time by which we have to do this sort of thing in order to get people to buy into what we're doing. And so this is a massive sort of philosophical point for higher education right now, which is if knowledge is good for knowledge's sake, and if you're all going to be better citizens and better with your families and better people on the school board because you came and got a liberal arts education, then why should I go on Fox News and say that it's also useful? The other side would be, we're paying all this money for universities, what are we getting out of it? And you know, most university administrators kind of take the middle. So I'm in the middle here. I go on Fox News, I talk about the use of the university, but when he tries to get me to say something bad about the president, I don't do it. So that's the sort of extreme moderation that, that universities, the administrators, tend to take. And you know, that's a big part of what we're sort of here discussing and hoping that this whole class will kind of build you up to thinking about. Because these are big issues, and this is your university, and you need to own it. And you know, the question of whether you want the chancellor on Fox News talking about startups, or whether you know, that's not a good thing. But these are decisions that you all partly need to make, and that's kind of what we're trying to frame here today.
So next year, if you stay tuned, he'll probably be a little less moderate because he won't be chancellor. Say whatever he wants. Okay, so we start off with the premise of these great research universities. And interestingly, the research university is a term of art. And there are, these days, about 65 or so? How many research universities?
There are 3,000 universities in the United States.
No, but
research
the member of the
AAU has 61.
61 research universities as defined by certain definitions, which means they're among the elite universities in the world. So those universities clearly are the crown jewels of our society. There isn't anything else like them, if you think about it, that combines the financial resources. So their combined endowment is roughly $250 billion. So those 60 or so universities, $250 billion endowment. Then you look at the intellectual capital in terms of who's there. You know, virtually every Nobel Prize winner has been trained at one of these research universities. The numbers, I think it's 80 some odd percent. And you look at the people, the ecosystem that surrounds those universities, and it's just phenomenal. And then if you ask, are these institutions here to stay? I want to invest in something, but I want to invest in something that I know is going to be around. And I'm trying to decide between UNC, Google, Facebook, and Hewlett-Packard, and my time horizon is 200 years. 200 years. And my decision is going to be, what am I most confident will be around, 200 years from now? It's UNC. And here's the interesting statistic. In the year 15, if you look at the significant institutions that existed in 1550, and still exist, and that includes the Catholic Church, the British Parliament. You know, we're talking about venerable institutions. 70 of the 85 are universities. So of the major institutions in the world that existed in 1550 and still exist today, 70 of the 85 are universities. So in fact, there's money, there's intellectual capital, and they're here to stay. if you've heard the term runway, there's a very long runway for universities. So even though they're hard to change and they're frustrating sometimes, they are going to be here for a long time. They're stable and they have incredible resources available to them. But as Holden said, the bill has come due. And honestly, I think for a long time, we got a bit of a free ride. You could sit in the ivory tower, you could do your research, you could talk to students a little bit, probably not any more than you wanted to, and you just could sort of do your thing. And as it turns out, those days are probably over. That universities, there's an expectation from all kinds of people, from legislators, from the general public, from the news media, from foundations, from the government, from places like the National Science Foundation, and I think most importantly from students who say, we need to do something about the world's biggest problems. That it's no longer just okay to sit in the lab or sit in the classroom or sit in your office and think great thoughts. There are too many important things out there, and if universities don't step up and make a difference, who is going to do it? I mean, there was a time in our society when we had some great research labs. Anyone heard of Bell Labs? Bell Labs, yeah. Bell Labs is a big deal. It's not anymore. And Park, you read about Park, right? And that's where the idea for the mouse is invented, the idea for the user interface. I think Park still exists, but it's a shadow of its former self. And these private research labs are gone. There are some large government labs that still exist, like the National Institute of Health, but largely the work's going to be done at universities. There's nowhere else to do it. So how the heck are we going to get this done? We think, and really the premise of the book is that at the intersection between innovation and execution, and I must tell you that we thought this up after we wrote the book, I think, because I looked and I couldn't find it anywhere in the book, but it's a good idea, which is this, at the intersection between innovation and execution is this mindset that we've been talking to you about. So let's just talk for a minute about innovation. How do you think universities are at innovation? I mean, on a scale of 1 to 10, what kind of rating would you give us on innovation? Relatively high? 6, 7, 8, something. I've got a 9 here. So we're probably pretty good on innovation, right? How do you think we do on execution? 3, 2. We're not as good on execution, right? We're a long way away on execution. So entrepreneurs really at their best. So Drucker, you know, the best, we've been talking all semester about what is an entrepreneur. And people are always asking me, what's the best definition? And I really think it's 2 words that Drucker said, entrepreneurs innovate. Entrepreneurs innovate. And I know that's not like this long thing, but it's sort of like a Zen statement or something, because in many ways it has everything in it. Entrepreneurs innovate. But they also execute. And that's the kind of secret sauce, that they do innovate. Very often they're innovating. Very often what we're calling innovation is literally stealing other people's ideas. So that's the, we're good at the university at innovating, but remember Ray Kroc went and saw the drive-in, and the next thing we know, we got McDonald's. It wasn't his idea. And, there are a number of people, including my dear colleague John Aiken, who does not believe Steve Jobs invented anything. He just stole other people's ideas and executed. And there's a strong argument for that, because that's kind of what entrepreneurs do. They take these ideas that other people have and make them happen. So this secret sauce that I think we, in some ways, discovered by accident, is that when you get entrepreneurs together with academics, you can begin to start solving some of this execution issue, and some really amazing things can happen. And that's kind of what the argument that we're trying to make in our book. You want to add anything to that, Holden?
Well, yeah, so I think, and you all can think of some examples of this. So what about Facebook? And what happened in the social network? What happened? Remember there was a scene where they went to see my counterpart at Harvard? Did I ever tell you all the story about that? So Larry Summers was the president of Harvard during the social network thing, and he came down here, and I had dinner with him, and he said that he was telling about the scene in the movie where, who goes to see Larry Summers, do you all know? Yeah, the Winklevoss twins, where the Winklevoss twins go to see Larry Summers, and it sounded really good, and so my wife said, well, we should go see this movie because, you know, there's not many other movies with a research university president as a character. And so we go down to Southern Village, and it's like 9:50. We want to watch the 9:50 showing of The Social Network, and it's the night Harry Potter was starting. And so the guy at the counter says, well, we're actually not going to do the 9:50 show because we have to put Harry Potter on the projector for the midnight showing. And I said, well, do you have any other movies where a university president is an important character? And he says, well, no, not unless you count Dumbledore. So I was very impressed with that, how quickly he came up with that. But anyway, so the Winklevoss twins go to see Larry Summers because what? They said Facebook was their idea, right? So are the Winklevoss twins entrepreneurs? No, they innovated, but they didn't execute. Right? Mark Zuckerberg just started Facebook faster than they did. And that's a thing about all this that people, especially in universities, have a hard time because we're mostly idea people. So we think if you come up with the idea that that's kind of the whole thing. But remember when Bob Schatzinger was here talking to you about Viamet and how he said other companies had thought about metalloenzymes before, but they all said we already tried it? Well, what Viamet did was we just did a better job at executing our metalloenzyme strategy than Big Pharma did. And we could probably go through every single presentation that you've had here that would bring up the same point.
And Jobs.
And of course, Jobs, he's the master.
You read a whole book about that, execution, right? I mean, there are tablets forever, you know? And people said, well, they looked at the iPad and people said, this is nothing but a warmed over phone. Nobody's going to want it. And then people bought it and they went, oh my God. You know, now, as recently as last night, Joe DeSimone, this great big scientist, said, I just don't know if I need an iPad. And I said, Joe, just buy one. I mean, I'm not going to try to explain to you why you need an iPad. Just buy one. And that's what happens, people, because it works.
Oh, because it's a television. iPad's a television that you can carry around with you.
Okay.
So, everything else you can do with it, you can do with some other device.
All right, so the story is now you're going to get this tag team thing that Holden and I actually have been doing this for a long time like this. So these, you know, one of the points that we're sort of making to you from the beginning is that entrepreneurs come in lots of flavors, and this isn't just about some business guy who's coming to the university and telling us how we should do things better, and more like a business, and we should operate the university more like a business, which honestly, for 20 years, that's what entrepreneurship was about. It was about some guy saying, well, you don't know what you're doing, and that if you, we'll tell you how to operate this thing more like a business, and actually they're still doing that, I think. But the fact of the matter is Muhammad Yunus is an entrepreneur, and so is Bill Gates on both sides, now is a great philanthropist. In the middle is Jacqueline Novogratz, who wrote a book called The Blue Sweater. Anyone in the class read The Blue Sweater? Great book about sort of entrepreneurship and the developing world. Oprah, certainly. And the guy at the far left is Gary Hirschberg, who started Stonyfield Yogurt. And it then morphed into this amazing company in Bangladesh that makes low-cost yogurt, and he's an amazing social entrepreneur. The point is that we can give you entrepreneurial skills, but how you apply them is up to you. And that probably the biggest frontier in entrepreneurship today is social entrepreneurship. And in fact, I think that's, well, it's not the next slide. So in any event, it's an important concept. And if you're going to work in the university, you've got to have a broad definition of entrepreneurship. Because you've got to talk to anthropologists and sociologists and all kinds of people. And when we first introduced this, we led with social entrepreneurship. I mean, that was the horse we rode, because we knew if we didn't, then this would be marginalized as a project for the business school, instead of something that could impact the whole university. You want to add anything to that? Or?
No, I think that's good.
Okay. So, the first big point of the book is that entrepreneurial thinking increases the impact of scientific research. We've talked about that with these guys. Anything you want to add to that at this point, or?
No, I mean, maybe people will have some questions about that at the end, because I think that's an important point of this whole thing.
Yeah. So, we talked about the Langer Lab and the DeSimone Lab, but clearly our premise is that if you organize around problems, you have a higher likelihood of having an impact, as opposed to organizing around a discipline. So we do need chemists, we do need physicists, we do need astronomers, but and geographers and all kinds of people. But ultimately, when you organize around a problem, that's where the kind of action is, and that's sort of the big takeaway, I think, from the scientific research. Okay, so the other thing, and this is probably one of the big ideas of the book. And I think you've talked about this a lot. You may want to, is there anything you want?
Well, I think that, as Buck said a minute ago, we wanted to do all this entrepreneurship stuff at Carolina in a way that wouldn't just be in the business school or just be about business. And I think at the time, like most great ideas, we didn't think that because we knew how it was going to come out and that social entrepreneurship was going to be such a big thing in the university, because at the time, it wasn't the kind of thing that you hear about constantly like you do now.
You didn't want to go to the
I think we just thought it was a good way to get more people interested in what we were doing.
Yeah.
Which it did succeed at doing. But I think what the outcome of it has been is that this entrepreneurial thinking is something that people are willing to embrace from lots of different perspectives, because they want to fix poverty, or they want to fix health disparities, or because they want to create some gadget that everybody's going to buy. And giving that wide of a group of people a way to latch onto all this, I think, has been a really positive thing that we've done.
Yeah. And it's, we honestly thought about it as nonprofit and social entrepreneurship in the same breath. And I think we've learned over the years that some of the best opportunities on the for-profit side may be in social entrepreneurship. That it's not a good distinction. The for-profit, nonprofit has broken down pretty significantly.
Well, and just to be fair about the whole story, I didn't want to put the social entrepreneurship chapter in the book.
Yeah.
Buck had to talk me into it.
So, right.
Science is what's important.
Right. If left to its own devices, we would have had a lot of theorems and a lot more about rock and roll.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
That's another book.
right.
All right. So, and
No, I get it now.
the next big point in the book is that multidisciplinary.
Chris has a question.
Oh, okay.
Okay, Chris.
Can you give an example of both for-profit and nonprofit successful social entrepreneur model?
Oh, for-profit and a nonprofit successful social entrepreneurship thing. Well, nonprofit would definitely be Teach for America. I mean, Teach for America still pays for itself by getting billionaires to make huge gifts to TFA, and Wendy Kopp is a great fundraiser. Wendy Kopp could be a university president if she wanted to, because she's good at going around and getting billionaires to give hundreds of millions of dollars to TFA. And you know, it's even possible on the same day that if I'm out doing fundraising, I could run into Wendy Kopp in the lobby of various office buildings in New York.
Yeah. Well, the Acumen Fund that Jackie Novogratz runs is a venture capital fund that invests in the developing world, and they hope to make money. They hope to compete with other venture capital funds. Their rate of return is probably a little lower, but it's still a valid and viable venture capital fund that attempts to make key investments that will make a difference in the developing world.
And a lot of people would say that TFA is not a social entrepreneurship venture because it still relies on philanthropy. And that the definition of social entrepreneurship would be sort of like Muhammad Yunus, the Grameen Bank. Eventually it generates enough profit to pay for itself. We don't agree with that. But our whole shtick is to try to get these things broadened out as much as possible. So since we're on the multidisciplinary thing, I just want to say this is another major philosophical question for higher education. There are people who think chemistry, philosophy, history, these things are really, really important. And that when we branch across fields, the intellectual rigor of these things tends to get watered down. And there's a famous intellectual from the 1970s, Jakob Bernowski, who used to go on public television and would be documentaries about history and philosophy and stuff, and he would be sort of the guy, the narrator. And he said, mediocre research is done between fields, which the economist is over there nodding his head, saying he agrees with that. But that's right. So, but the great problems are also between fields. So we have this dichotomy that we've evolved these institutions to do excellent research in these silos of chemistry and philosophy and econ, but the great problems of the world are mostly ones that combine more than one field, or they're great problems that we've already solved because we know how to do these individual disciplines well. And so this is a great challenge, and I don't think it's fair to say that the disciplinary people are wrong completely because they're adhering to excellent, rigorous, intellectual pursuit. But it's also not true to say that the people who want to smear out all the disciplines and not have departments in the university or whatever crazy thing they want to do, that they're completely wrong either, because they're trying to come up with ways to address the truly great issues that society is facing, which universities, despite their 500-year staying power, haven't really done a very good job of solving. And that is another sort of major philosophical question for you all to think about.
Right, and a big part of the book. So in the book, I think it's maybe in the section you're going to read for the next class, there's a thing at Stanford called BioX. And BioX is both intellectually and geographically at the it's at Stanford. Very cool building. And it's at the intersection geographically and intellectually between engineering, chemistry, physics, and the med school. So they're trying to pull those disciplines together to make a difference in human health. And they're building the building. And Norman Foster, who is one of the great architects in the world, is designing the building. And the guy, one of the guys who started it is a guy named Jim Spudish, who's a biochemistry guy. And John Hennessy, who's the president of Stanford, calls and says, Jim, we're a little short on money, and I think we're going to have to do away with the cafeteria and the bottom of the building. Well, the cafeteria is this huge room, and if you might guess, it's Northern California, you know, lots of sushi, lots of Asian food, you know, it's just incredible. And you're sitting there looking at doctors with stethoscopes talking to physics people and chemistry people, and, you know, a lot of interesting conversations. And Spudish, but he's saying before it's even done, we're going to have to do away with the cafeteria. And Jim Spudish says, John, let's do away with the labs and keep the cafeteria. And that's really emblematic, I think, of what happens here is that you get people together from multi-disciplines, multiple, and wild and really important things happen. And it won't just happen naturally. I mean, it's unbelievable how it won't happen naturally. There are a few places on our campus, the Hyde Hall, a few others, where it happens, but I was talking to a guy from the pharmacy school, and he went to Lenore, came with me to have lunch at Lenore Hall. He'd been on the campus, I don't know, 3 or 4 years. He'd never been to Lenore Hall. Right. So it's a challenge.
Right, and the best solution to it, because if you go back to this thing I'm saying about disciplinary excellence, it's probably better to have a really well-trained chemist and a really well-trained doctor working together than it is to have someone who's got half a training in chemistry and half a training as a doctor trying to do both of those things. And universities have the ability to promote this, but it's, as Buck said, it's really difficult because, and this is, those of you are going to be professors one day. Professors love their subject more than anything else. So they will do anything they can, ECON will do anything they can to make sure that public policy doesn't get a faculty line, and that they do. Because they love ECON so much. And within ECON, the microeconomics economics people want to get a faculty search more than the macroeconomics people. And they'll have a big fight with each other. I'm sorry I'm stomping on ECON, but every department is like this. And it drives a lot of people crazy about universities because they think, well, we have this tough politics and, you know, we're not really arguing over anything that's all that important. But the reason it is important is because we have people working here who love their field so much that they're willing to stab their friends in the back in order to get what they want because they love their discipline so much. And that's part of what has driven us to where we are in a good way. Yeah.
The training mission, you have to train people in economics, chemistry, biology, then you bring them together to work. But if you bring them together to train them, they'll all have a little chemistry, a little biology, and you'll have nobody who knows anything. And so if you have departments that bring them together, a lot of people from a lot of fields, and they train their students in one class in each of these and all, you get a bunch of generalists who can't solve any problems because they don't know any skills. So you have to train the people to really know something, and then you bring them together and let them work. And I think you have to have both, and that's really hard, and it's also really costly.
And John and I agree about this, but we could have brought you some colleagues who would argue it the other way.
And honestly, that's why we do the minor in entrepreneurship.
Chris is one of those.
Yeah. Because we want you to major in something like chemistry or philosophy or whatever. Okay, here we got a question.
Okay, do you think the fields are invented to solve the big problems of the time, or were they solved? Or were these fields set up without thought to the world's challenges from the get-go? Yeah, so I think that these fields have evolved mainly, I mean, the big ones started in the Greek times, you know, mathematics and astronomy and philosophy. And, you know, as Buck said, university's been around 500 years, and we hardly ever get rid of any disciplines. So if a subject graduates to being a department at a lot of universities, then it's kind of made its place in the world. But it happens very, very rarely. I mean, we haven't created a department at UNC in a long time. There's talk about creating an applied sciences department, and there's so much fighting about it you can't believe all the different strong opinions about it. So I think that these, I mean, I'd love to give you an intellectual answer to this, but it's really driven more by the emotions that people have about their disciplines and sort of human behavior and things like that. It's not set up to address problems. It's set up because college students wanted to read certain things, and it just evolved over time.
Okay, there's a question back here. Go ahead.
You were talking, Chancellor, you were talking about, y'all agreed on that the emphasis needs to be on your field and really trying to strive to be great in your field. And you said there are some colleagues that don't agree with that.
Yeah.
So what, like, specifically, to me it's been so clear, especially the way y'all have been very verbose in this class and explaining to me why it's important to focus on a discipline with some thinking skills. So how do you go about approaching those people that don't agree with that, and what specific type of strategies do you use? Because it seems like the people in this class in the private sector have been able to say, you know, we got a team and one person each knows their specific field the best, and bring them together is the best way. But you know, they're trained in one specific area. So how do you go about telling people that that's important instead of the broader thinking?
Right. So let me just try to rehearse the counter argument for you as best I can. So if you believe that the biggest problem that we're facing is racism, well, we don't have a department that just studies that. And in order to understand it, you need to know a little bit about music, and a little bit about history, and a little bit about literature, and a little bit about sociology, and a little bit about political science. And so, so the argument would be that you could have a more problem-focused education if you were trained on that problem. Or if it was AIDS, then you need to know all those same things, plus world economics and some stuff about medicine. And you know, the disciplinary people like me believe that you should work your way up to working on these interdisciplinary problems. But there are plenty of people, and I certainly wasn't one of them. I mean, when I was in college, I studied chemistry and I played in the jazz band, and then I went to graduate school and I studied chemistry, and I wasn't in student government, and I didn't know if Gaza and Israel had gone to war when I was in college. I would have had no idea that was happening. And in some ways, I'm grateful for that, because I focused on my science. But on the other hand, I look back on it and I think, God, you know, the 1980s, I mean, there was some really snarky stuff going on then, and I had absolutely no idea. It wasn't until the early 90s. Remember when Bill Clinton got inaugurated and Maya Angelou said, "Good morning"? Y'all weren't born then. But when Bill Clinton was inaugurated, Maya Angelou was the
laureate.
The speaker, yeah, and her talk ended with "Good morning." And then there was this massive debate about why she was saying good morning. Well, it's because in the 1980s, we were all asleep. And you know, your generation wouldn't have let the 1980s happen because you're way more plugged into things than we were. So,
All right, we're going to have to keep going to get through this.
that's my, I don't know if I answered your question, but that's it.
So the next point is that we think leadership is critical, and as you'll see in the readings you're going to do coming up, this is the guy that we kind of point to as really one of the absolutely great presidents. John Hennessy at Stanford. We spent some time talking with him, and he is an example of a great leader. He also happened to have started a really cool company called MIPS, and is on the board of, I think, is he on the board of Google or Facebook, or I think Google.
Yeah, I think Google.
Because I think the Google guys got started at Stanford, and I think he knew them, and I'm pretty sure. So he's an academic. Is he an engineer, I think, isn't he?
Yeah.
And also an entrepreneur. And we kind of think that that's certainly not essential, but as you'll see from our writing, there are some things we do think are pretty important, and they have to do with accessibility, non-hierarchical, trying to make decisions, trying to create, and actually the next point works into that. Culture, not structure. I think we still think that.
Yeah.
Don't you? Yeah. So the idea here is that spending a lot of time creating new departments and new centers, and every time somebody raises a little bit of money is probably not particularly productive, but creating a culture that says yes instead of no, and that encourages you guys to stay up all night and invent a new business, which some of you did last weekend. And congratulations. We had some winners in the class. In fact, I had to not judge because there's so many people in our class doing projects that I don't want to pick one over the other. But so you guys clearly have been bitten by, many of you, by that bug. And your projects are other examples. And I must tell you that I was pretty blown away by the projects. They were really good. What you can do on an iPhone is pretty amazing now. So creating a culture is really, really important. And I think as we were writing this book, and I'll let Holden chime in here, but someone said to me, you know, I don't know if I would have to actually talk to Holden or call him more than once a year, maybe not even then, but knowing that I could changes everything. Knowing that I could changes everything, and that's a culture. It's not that there are any rules about that, but a structure that lets people know that that can happen makes a huge difference. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll just answer this question, and then
Yeah.
we're going to be out of time.
No, we're good. We're good.
So I think we're tracking towards a vision for Carolina that makes sense. This place has, you know, in terms of Michael Porter being different from other places, the university is excellent in the qualifications that you all bring to the undergraduate class, the PhD programs in arts and sciences, the quality of the professional schools, really, really excellent. And it's merged with a mentality that is more outwardly focused than a lot of schools that are equally excellent. So fewer of you are going to go work at McKinsey and Bain and Goldman Sachs than your peers at private universities that are just as hard to get into and just as excellent in research. And if some of you are going to go to McKinsey and Bain and Goldman Sachs, that's good. I hope you make a lot of money. I'm going to come ask you to give it back. Or my successor will. But I think it's also cool to be at a place where some people are going to start NGOs and some people are going to go work in politics and some people are going to do all these different and cool things. And so we have in terms of Michael Porter's lecture, that's our thing. We're a college that has engaged students who are thinking about the big problems and enjoying being on a beautiful campus and participating in college life, but at the same time, the excellence level is very, very high. I mean, we're the number 9 research university in the country, and you know, you all are part of one of the most selectively admitted classes of students. But at the same time, you're having a good time and you're fun to interact with, and you're thinking about the rest of the world and not just what goes on in Chapel Hill. So those are that's the Carolina strategy, and I think we're on our way towards that. And the thing that I worry about is whether we can convince the people of North Carolina how important it is to preserve that. And the force would be against the academic excellence. Well, if this is a university for North Carolina, does it really need to be better than, there's 3,000 colleges and universities that get federal grants, does it really need to be better than 2,991 of the others? Or would it be just as good for North Carolina if it was, better than 2,900? And in my opinion, you would lose a lot of what makes it special if that happened. And that's the thing that we have to fight for.
So the only other thing I would add on this culture, not structure, is I was thinking about it just as the two of us do this thing. we've kind of figured out that part of the secret sauce is to combine academics and entrepreneurs together in almost everything we do. So all throughout the minor and just throughout almost all of the initiatives that you see going on here. And it's true in the School of Public Health, in the medical school, other places. We've got entrepreneurs and academics working side by side. So the trick is to find people who can meet the other one halfway. And it's easy when the academic is also an entrepreneur. And our partnership is now 7 or so years old and has worked pretty well. But we've replicated it all over the place. And believe it or not, that's really unusual. When we talk to other places, that's not really done very much. And I think that's probably one of the things that makes us different. So that creates this culture, and it's a pretty cool culture. New roles, we've sort of talked about this, the new roles for academics, which will emerge. And we talk about this in the book, and you'll see there's a public scholar. There are various other roles for academics besides the traditional bench. And if you have any doubt, you've got the chancellor here, and that's a pretty broad role for an academic. We think metrics matter, so we talk a lot about how are you doing, and actually being able to measure how you're doing, and we're doing better with that in some places than others. And I think our grand vision someday is to have what we call a dashboard that rolls up to a university dashboard, from a college dashboard down to a departmental dashboard that measures the metrics of how we are doing. And increasingly, universities are being demands are being put on them to do that, and metrics are going to matter in higher education. And also, you have to understand the new donor. There's the example of the quintessential new donor. But I'd recommend to all of you, go look at Bill Gates's, he writes an annual letter. And he does it because his mentor, Warren Buffett, writes an annual letter. But Bill Gates's annual letter is pretty darn interesting in terms of looking at the big problems they're going after, measuring how well they do. And if you want to understand how new donors, whether they're individuals or foundations or the federal government, are going to be thinking, it's much more like what we're outlining here. They're looking for results, and they're looking for impact, and they're looking for entities that are going after big problems. And they're looking for multidisciplinarity. They don't want to see just a chemistry professor, just a doctor. They want to see the right team being aimed at the right problems. So a lot of this, if you believe that you follow the money increasingly embraces almost everything that we talked about, I think. Now, you've had a little more experience with this than I have, but.
Well, I think, I said that in the video.
Yeah.
I think that is in the book, so.
So, I mean, those are the
We need to go on to the poll.
All right, so it's time.
It's time.